Hi, I'm actor Ian Champion, and welcome to History of Horror Cinema, my personal podcast tour of the good, bad, and the ugly of horror movie history. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe. The Seventh Victim, 1943. The third partnership of Lewton and Tenure would unfortunately be their last. The avarice of RKO executives ignored the rare chemistry that made their film so lucrative. They figured that by splitting these two great talents into separate units, they could double their success. In later life, Tenure reflected on the secret to their profitable partnership that should have made separation an unthinkable demand. Val was the dreamer, the idealist. I was the materialist, the realist. RKO baited the twosome with the carrot of promotion to the highly prized shop window of A features. Having no real choice, Tenure nevertheless blossomed creatively with the classic Robert Mitchum film noir Out of the Past in 1947 and the 1957 cult horror hit Curse of the Demon, Night of the Demon in the UK. Although Lewton had no say in the split either, he did have a choice in whether to accept advancement. Despite the higher budgets, the studio were not willing to risk his decision to assign a first directing role to editor Mark Robson. Their deal-breaker ultimatum was that either he chose a more experienced A-feature helmer or stayed in B pictures, where such a gamble's risk was much less costly. Out of admirable loyalty to his friends, one of his finest traits, Lewton decided to stay in lower-budget B movies and continue his relative creative freedom. Remember, no messages. We do have a message. Death is good. With this stark reply to a studio executive, Lewton boldly stated his uncompromising vision for his fourth production. It was to be controversial, lacking the success of his previous releases, but some argue that the undiluted nihilism of The Seventh Victim rendered it a masterpiece. Lewton knew all too well that wartime audiences needed escapist thrills and horror. His films catered to that, yet at the same time he committed to a story whose main character rejected all hope, pursuing a trajectory toward death whose only positivity was that it was her intended goal. Lewton gained great satisfaction from gradually nurturing the rest of his expert team, that thankfully remained untouched by his employer's fiscally driven interference. Editor Mark Robson had risen from uncredited assistant editor of Orson Welles' Citizen Kane and The Magnificent Ambersons under fellow Lewton protégé Robert Wise to sole editor of Journey into Fear. Ironically, after RKO finally lost patience with Welles' costly demands and transferred Robson to Lewton's B-picture wing, the editor found this particular deck shuffling had actually landed him on his feet. Under his new mentor, Robson could fully express his talents into crafting a style that, for example, helped create the signature Lewton bust jump shock editing for cat people. Now that Lewton was short of a director, he felt the time was right for Robson to helm his own film. He wrote to his mother during production that he was very fond of the young man and the skills that made him almost as good as Jacques. As pre-production began on The Seventh Victim, Robson was still operating out of the 8x8 office he had continued to share with Robert Wise. Never mind, it was time to grab the brass ring and show what he could do. Robson was fortunate to inherit Lewton's well-oiled machine of proven talents to assist him, as well as his producer's defining hands-on influence. This was felt across every department, most crucially in the foundation of any production's chances for success. A good script. Having begun as a writer, then story editor for David O. Selznick, Lewton never lost sight of this as the core of quality. He would perform uncredited rewrites of all 9 of his films, which is why they contain such remarkably dense, often autobiographical themes and literary depth. To begin with, Lewton saw that the studio-enforced title of The Seventh Victim could be co-opted to support a tale of modern-day black magic in New York's Greenwich Village. The crippling demands of the B-picture format meant that a first draft was commissioned from his Cat People screenwriter DeWitt Bodine, whilst I Walked with a Zombie was still in production. This was unsatisfactory, so Charles O'Neill, father of actor Ryan, who just today I heard had passed away, submitted a 72-page treatment more to Lewton's liking, much of which made it into the final script. Bringing his trademark exacting research to the project, Lewton had Bodine inquire about attending Satanist meetings in New York. His presence was surprisingly welcome, and the resulting fascinating glimpse into their world inspired the eerie surface normality of the film's occultists. He recalled a group of genteel elderly pensioners who could have been at a coffee morning. Far from being conduits for ancient evil, their spellcasting was directed at the Allies' approved nemesis, Adolf Hitler. The seventh victim's power comes from the incongruity of dark witchcraft practices hiding almost in plain sight in a sometimes daytime modern urban setting. Roman Polanski would extend this mood with the stunningly creepy Rosemary's Baby in 1967. Yet in a still relatively God-fearing America of the 40s, the bravery of Lewton and Robson's vision remains potent for its greater subversiveness. Tragic foreshadowing confronts us right from the opening shot. A quote from John Donne's Holy Sonnet 7, "I run to death, and death meets me as fast, and all my pleasures are like yesterday's." Someone over the next 70 minutes will willingly embrace such a fatal accelerated trajectory. This qualifies the seventh victim as film noir, a sense that the deadly cards of fate are already dealt, that destiny will be determined not by random chance, but by character choices. Our everyman protagonist on this crazy journey is late-teen schoolgirl Mary Gibson, well played by future Oscar winner for 1951's A Streetcar Named Desire, Kim Hunter. Hers will be a path from sheltered youth into harsh experience as traumatic as that undergone by soldiers on the battlefield. The 20-year-old Hunter was perfect for the part. She exudes a thoughtful poise and a genuine innocence. In her first film role, coming from a stage background, her fear of making extraneous movements caused Lewton to urge her to relax her initial stiffness. We meet her in the Highcliffe boarding school run by frosty headmistress Mrs. Lowood, Ottula Nesmith, whose name is an homage to the cruel Lowood school of Jane Eyre's formative years. Mrs. Lowood and her assistant Mildred Gilchrist, Eve March, break the news to Mary that her sister Jacqueline, who was funding her there, has gone missing. Rather than pay her owed fees in employed tutelage, Mary sets out to track her down, leaving behind a tinge of dom-sub-lesbianism between Lowood and Gilchrist. This hint of sapphic subtext will recur more than once in the film's female relationships. Mary heads for the cosmetic firm of La Sagesse, owned by the wealthy Jacqueline. In Steve Haberman's otherwise superb DVD commentary, he erroneously translates the company name as The Way, instead of the more accurate Wisdom. This hints at some private knowledge Jacqueline may be seeking. Jacqueline's employee friend Frances, played by Isabel Jewell, Gone with the Wind's Emmy Slattery, recommends that Mary try Dante's restaurant, where she saw her a week ago. Here is a lightly autobiographical touch by Lewton, basing the restaurant and the Greenwich Village locale on the area he and his wife frequented early in their married life. He also adds literary flourishes to the venue, not just in the name, but establishing the soon-to-be important character of Jason, Urford Gage, tellingly at the feet of a Dante mural. Is this a foretelling of hellishness, we ask? Not to begin with, as once celebrated poet Jason flirts with Marguerite Silver, the owner's wife, and comes over at her request to cheer up the troubled Mary. He deserves points for trying, as Mary has just been up to the spare room Jacqueline rented from them and been met with the portentous sight of a hanging noose and a wooden chair. Clearly, Jacqueline had darker matters in mind than lipstick shades. The somber mood is amplified when Mary goes to the depressing Missing Persons Bureau, underscoring the air of dismal isolation and the ease with which the modern city loses its neglected inhabitants. A ray of hope, though, is the ambulance-chasing private investigator Irving August, Lou Lubin. Despite circling for potential clients like a vulture, he takes pity on the penniless Mary and offers to take her case for nothing, a good Samaritan deed he possibly regrets when she persuades him to go snooping with her to the factory. This sequence is classic Lewton, combining Nicholas Musuraca's artfully shadowy lighting with a single soundtrack detail. Here, a ticking clock to crank up the tension. August staggers out of the room that Mary has shamed him into exploring alone and collapses dead, a pair of scissors embedded in his back. From here, the hidden horror gradually bleeds into the everyday world. As Mary returns home on the subway, across from her, two apparent drunks nurse their paralytic pal. She is shocked to suddenly recognize their fallen comrade is the dead body of August. She hurries to flee the compartment while one of the men fixes her with an utterly sober, accusatory stare. The web of intrigue is further spun by the addition of other interesting principal characters who get to live longer. There is Gregory Ward, a lawyer who helps Mary while at first concealing from her that Jacqueline is his wife. He is played by Hugh Beaumont, later to find fame as sitcom dad Ward Cleaver in the hugely popular Leave It to Beaver series. Our anticipation of Jacqueline strengthens from his description of the alluring impact she possesses. Something exciting and unforgettable about Jacqueline. Something you'd never quite get hold of. Something that keeps a man following after her. Such a femme fatale can lead a man to his own tragedy, another component of classic film noir. As the plot develops, inadvertently so too does Mary's inappropriate attraction toward him. More complexity is provided by a third Lewton appearance for Tom Conway, intriguingly returning as the same suavely naughty psychiatrist, Dr. Lewis Judd, who was clawed to death by Irina in Cat People, during some highly inappropriate personal therapy from him. We can only speculate that this is an earlier case of his, or exists in a parallel dimension. He projects even greater callousness this time for someone from a caring profession, choosing to write instead of slumming it with unstimulating patients. Dipsomania is rather sordid, he tells one client's relative. Even so, we can't help liking Judd for his ambiguity. He is still a bad boy who flirts with danger. I prefer the left, the sinister side, he says of the two opposing staircases when he takes Mary to meet her sister. We are never quite sure which side Judd is really on until the end, and the film is all the more satisfying for it. We do know that Judd was treating Jacqueline for depression after she left a strange cult known as the Palladists. More enigmatic still is the first brief glimpse given to us of Jacqueline, Jean Brooks, pressing her finger to her lips upon seeing the stunned Mary. The naturally blonde Brooks came from Johnny Mac Brown westerns and makes a striking entrance in a black, straight-fringed wig. There is something haunting and haunted about her, and this tantalizing sight before she vanishes is like a spectral visitation. She must stay in hiding as a fugitive from justice for August's murder. Our examination of the therapist deepens when Mary goes to a party with Ward. Here, Judd reveals that he envies his friend Jason's literary gifts that he abandoned after a well-received debut book. A loud-mouthed guest remarks ambiguously about Judd and Jacqueline that, when she took up with Lewis, she went out of circulation just like that, which might suggest private practice of either an unethical or sinister nature. Does Judd's magic card trick at the side for a group of guests conversely argue him as a skeptic of hocus pocus? Jason takes up the poisoned chalice of detective, and from his library research uncovers the parallelogram symbol of the Palladists, which, not by coincidence, is also the logo for the cosmetics company. As Mary gets closer to the coven, she is given a subtly malevolent warning not to interfere from employee Mrs. Reddy, Mary Newton, that prefigures Alfred Hitchcock's infamous shower scene imagery in Psycho. Reddy delivers her literally veiled threat. I have no intention whatsoever of hinting, as a looming silhouette on the other side of the shower curtain, while poor Mary is nakedly vulnerable in the stall. The quasi-lesbian dominance of the older woman's position also did not go unnoticed by perceptive critics. When we finally meet the Palladists, the very ordinariness of their respectable middle-aged membership, documented in Bodine's script draft, adds to the chilling secrecy of their work. They even have the everyday committee problems of staying true to their defined ethos. In this case, a pledge of non-violence they must sideline to punish Jacqueline just like their previous 6 betrayers, justifying the title of the 7th victim. When they finally abduct Jacqueline, the quiet potency of their manner is devilishly effective. Instead of forcing her to drink poison, they surround her like genteel interventionists of support, encouraging her softly in a bid to come to the decision herself. It won't hurt. Frances reveals the depth of her private love for Jacqueline by an outburst protecting her employee from taking up the fatal wineglass. Before the final confrontation, there is one notable scene where Lewton makes Jacqueline's death wish undeniably clear as her own decision. Back home, she meets a neighbor across the hall. "I'm Mimi. I'm dying." This is Elizabeth Russell, whom we last saw as Cat People's mysterious Serbian soul sister interrupting Irina's wedding meal, and will later see more substantially in its 1944 sequel, Curse of the Cat People. Her Eastern European beauty masks a damaged soul battling inner demons, an anonymous casualty of mental illness adrift in the big city. It is no coincidence that she connects briefly with Jacqueline. They too are kindred spirits. I've always wanted to die. Always, agrees Jacqueline. Mimi declares that she will dance with gay abandon tonight, but Jacqueline knows she is not fooling anyone. You will die, she prophesies after Mimi exits. This becomes the catalyst for a strikingly understated climax, as Judd returns to the devil worshippers who sent Jacqueline spiraling downward. He confronts them in a manner wholly untypical of the average horror film, yet perfectly in keeping with Robson's understated tone. Their leader, Mr. Brune, a persuasive Ben Bard, lit by Musaraka from below for extra menace, argues for the sanctity of private belief. Who knows what is wrong or right? If I prefer to believe in satanic majesty and power, who can deny me? What proof can you bring that good is superior to evil? In reply, Judd hits him solely with the power of conviction. From belittling scorn, it's a joke, a pathetic little joke, to the simple righteousness of quoting the Lord's Prayer. His condemnation is superior, yet strangely moving, like a headmaster who is not angry but disappointed with his wayward pupils. Brune looks to the floor like a shamed schoolboy. Leaving the coven oddly suspended, the last scene is equally uncompromising. A defiantly glamorous Mimi heads out of her apartment, and the sound of a falling chair next door denotes Jacqueline's terminal self-realization. The seventh victim's bleak tone and downbeat ending may have aided its relative failure with audiences and critics at the time. The seductiveness of suicide was not what they wanted to hear during World War II. Another factor was the confusing narrative gaps, resulting from 4 scenes removed in post-production by Robson and editor John Lockhart, explaining, for example, how the Palladists knew where Jacqueline was hiding. It also feels congested in trying to impart and then resolve all the public and private sides of an incestuously small main cast. Nevertheless, the late 60s saw a rediscovery and positive reappraisal of this, along with all of Lewton's RKO body of work. In 1968, as anti-authoritarian dissent rioted in Paris and on student campuses across America, Rosemary's Baby's recent success birthed a little devil into the heart of modern society's cozy complacency, and one of its seemingly benign godparents looking over the cradle would be Val Lewton. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, please don't forget to hit subscribe.